Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut, continuing our series on the Baal Shem Tov, the life and teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. Here we are deep into understanding his life. The Baal Shem has already revealed himself, and his fame has spread. He's now known as a Baal Shem, a healer, a miracle worker, and he gets the special name Baal Shem Tov. No one else was called the Baal Shem Tov. There are many healers that were called Baal Shems, but he got the special name, the Baal Shem Tov. So all of that we've been exploring for the last many weeks. We're now at the part of his life. He's in his early 40s now, and the beginning of the Chassidic movement is spreading. And here's how we'll pick up the story. The story is, right now we're going to pick it up in 1741. So that means the Baal Shem Tov is 43 years old. And there's something else happening in the Jewish world. And that is a figure called the Ohr Hachaim. The Ohr Hachaim his actual name was Chaim ben Attar. Rabbi Chaim ben Attar was from Morocco. He was one of the leaders of the Moroccan Jewish community. And in 1741, he moved to Jerusalem. Then it was only the old city. He moved in 1741, and he began a yeshiva. The next year, in 1742, his book, called the Ohr Hachaim, the Light of Life, and he became known as the Ohr Hachaim. But again, his real name was Chaim ben Attar. And the book was an immediate, we'll call it bestseller. In those times, it wasn't so easy because we didn't have mass communication. Nonetheless, his book, the Ohr Hachaim, spread very, very quickly, and it is learned to this day. It is a classic work. It's based on the Parshas of the Torah, Torah commentary. The Baal Shem Tov, during this time, these years that the Ohr Hachaim is also becoming very famous, moving to Israel. His book is published. So the Baal Shem Tov, when he has what's called an aliyat neshama, an elevation of soul, he would go to the upper worlds, and he would be aware of the Ohr Hachaim was also in the upper worlds. And he reported that even though they were more or less in the same space at the same time, there are many, many different, we'll call it chambers or palaces or rooms in the upper worlds where Torah is being learned. And the Baal Shem reported that every time he got to a room, expecting that the Ohr Hachaim would be there, he had just moved on to a different room. Nonetheless, the Baal Shem Tov began to feel that if he could meet the Ohr Hachaim, if the two of them could get together, they could bring Mashiach. So what's going to unfold here is one of the most famous stories of the Baal Shem Tov, is because the Ohr Hachaim is now in Israel, so the Baal Shem Tov feels he needs to go to Israel because he really feels that these two great souls could get together, they could bring Mashiach. According to Chassidic tradition, the Baal Shem Tov was the nefesh of David HaMelech, and the Ohr Hachaim was the ruach of David HaMelech. And he felt if those two levels could get together, they could bring Mashiach. So the Baal Shem Tov decides he's going to come to Israel. But first he sends his brother-in-law, Rabbi Gershon, ahead of him to kind of pave the way. And he told him, when you get to Jerusalem, go to the Ohr Hachaim and ask to be part of his yeshiva. But don't mention me until the Ohr Hachaim mentions me. So Rabbi Gershon goes and he applies to learn at the yeshiva. The Ohr Hachaim interviews him, sees that he's already an accomplished scholar, and so he accepts him. The Baal Shem Tov said, once you're accepted, then ask him if you could go to his other yeshiva. The Ohr Hachaim set up a second yeshiva, but it was somewhat secretive. And in that yeshiva, they learned Kabbalah. And so after sitting for a week in the yeshiva, Rabbi Gershon asked the Ohr Hachaim, can I join your other yeshiva? Now, the Ohr Hachaim was very surprised. Like, how did you know about this other yeshiva? And not sure what Rabbi Gershon said, but he allowed him to enter. But a day later, when Rabbi Gershon came to learn there, they told him, the Ohr Hachaim says you can't come in. So Rabbi Gershon goes back to the Ohr Hachaim and asks, what did I do? What's the problem? He said, you didn't tell me that you're connected to the Baal Shem Tov. Why didn't you tell me? So Rabbi Gershon said, well, to be honest, the Baal Shem Tov told me not to mention it until you mention him. And so that's how the conversation went. And so what happened was the Ohr Hachaim, and Rabbi Gershon says that the Baal Shem Tov has seen you in the upper worlds. So the Ohr Hachaim said, I want you to communicate with the Baal Shem Tov and ask him, did you see my whole body? And so Rabbi Gershon found someone who was leaving Israel and going back to the vicinity of the Baal Shem Tov, and he sent a message. And the Baal Shem Tov got the message, and his honest answer was, I see your whole body, but I don't see your heels. And he sent the message back. The Ohr Hachaim receives this message, and he says, if the Baal Shem Tov doesn't see my heels, tell him, don't waste your time in coming. Nothing of what you want to come from this meeting is going to happen if you haven't seen my heels. Now, what's alluded to here is one of the terms for the period right before the Mashiach comes is called the heels of the Mashiach, Iktava de Mashiach, the footsteps of the Mashiach. Like you could hear the footsteps, it's approaching, the time is coming. And so the idea that he didn't see his heels, the Ohr Hachaim understood that even though they might want it to be the time of Mashiach, apparently it wasn't. And so Rabbi Gershon sends this message back. In the meantime, the Baal Shem Tov he's just on fire. He really believes in this mission. So he doesn't wait for the answer. And again, according to tradition, the Baal Shem Tov got signs from heaven: don't go. It's not time right now. Don't try to go to Israel. The Baal Shem Tov nevertheless sets out for Israel. So here we can learn something very, very important. First of all, it shows the importance of Eretz Yisrael in the unfolding of the Messianic era that is coming upon us. But even more so, this attempt by the Baal Shem Tov to come to Eretz Yisrael was indicative of a messianic streak running through the Chassidic movement to this day. And the Baal Shem Tov, in a certain way, initiated the importance of Eretz Yisrael in the bigger picture, even though then there were relatively very few Jews living in Israel, and they were barely eking out a living. Nonetheless, there were some very holy Jews here. But even more, it shows, even though the Baal Shem Tov was getting signs from heaven not to go, he went anyways. He was like, it was called like pushing the end, trying to bring Mashiach at almost any cost. And we see throughout the history of the Chassidic movement, there is a very, very strong streak of wanting to bring Mashiach. And we saw it especially in the last generation with the Lubavitcher Rabbi, where he made a tremendous emphasis on people learning about Mashiach, praying for Mashiach, doing mitzvot with the intention of helping bring Mashiach. And we really see the influence of the Baal Shem Tov on the Lubavitcher Rebbe in many ways. This is just one of them. Anyways, the Baal Shem Tov sets off for Eretz Yisrael. We mentioned last week, he only came with two other people. One was his daughter, Udal, and his scribe, Reb Tzvi. And as we clarified last week, it was not his son. He had a son, Tzvi, but this was a scribe called Reb Tzvi. But it also points out the tremendous honor and value that the Baal Shem Tov saw in his daughter. She was a very, very elevated soul. And the Baal Shem Tov was not only her father, but she was a student of the Baal Shem Tov among all his other students. But here we see that she was among the only trusted ones to come with him. And in those days, because of the status of women, and especially traveling through the Ottoman Empire, it was a bit dangerous and risky to take a woman. And yet, he brought his daughter. That's how close they were and how trusted she was. So they set off, and the rest of the story here, there are a number of different versions. They're all telling the same story, but there's a number of different versions. So somebody might have heard a little bit different, but this is how I understand it, how I've learned it. They're in the ship coming over, and they're trying to get to Istanbul. From Istanbul, you can get ships to Israel. It's not all that far. And then the main port was really Akko. Yaffo was also a port, Akko and Yaffo. That's where the boats would land. And so he's trying to get to Istanbul. And what happened is they were on this ship. It wasn't like today, like a cruise ship. These were pretty not so sturdy ships, and not always the most upright, moral people. Anyways, they're on this ship, and they stop at an island very close to Istanbul. And the captain says, we're going to stop here for a day to rest and to get some supplies. And so the Baal Shem Tov and his daughter and Reb Tzvi exit the ship, and they have a time to be back. But what happens is that the ship leaves without them, and all of their money and possessions are on board. They just kind of stepped off the ship, just kind of were looking around, expecting to go back in a few hours until the ship leaves. They're now stranded on this island with no money, and all of their possessions are gone. What happens is, in a very short time, they're surrounded by a band of bandits, robbers, and they're going to kill them. These are ruthless people. And so they're setting the scene to get rid of them, especially when they're so upset. They don't have any money. They have no possessions. So just let's get rid of them. But in the meantime, they were they were hungry. So they just kind of moved to the side and they're eating. And Reb Tzvi says to the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi, do something. Use your mystical powers to get us out of here. And the Baal Shem Tov famously said, I can't remember anything. My mind is blank. I'm like a child who's illiterate. I don't know anything. And Reb Tzvi says, Rabbi, how can this be? And so the Baal Shem Tov says, do you remember anything? Now we have to remember this is a very, very stressful situation. And so Reb Tzvi says, Rabbi, I also can't remember anything. And they're like, what are we going to do? Their time is limited here. The robbers are going to come back and kill them. So finally, Reb Tzvi says, I remember the Aleph Bet. So the Baal Shem says, well, start saying it. So he starts, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled. And right then, there's the cavalry comes on this island, and they save them from these robbers. And of course, this is a very traumatic situation here, experience. And in a certain way, it was just like another message from heaven warning the Baal Shem Tov, don't try to go to Eretz Yisrael now. Nonetheless, another ship pulls up and they offer to take them. And they take him to Istanbul. They arrive in Istanbul with no money and no possessions except what's on their back. And it's a few days before Pesach. And so they don't know anyone in Istanbul, and no one knows about the Baal Shem Tov at this point in Turkey. And so they're trying to figure out what to do. Before they know it, it's Erev Pesach. And the Baal Shem Tov is very depressed because he just doesn't know what to do. And the whole situation is very traumatic. So he goes to the shul to pray. And Udal, they had one change of clothes. So she went down to wash them so that at least they'll have some clean clothes for the holiday, but they don't know where to go for the holiday. And so right then, it's down by the port, a ship comes in, and a very, very wealthy resident of Istanbul is returning home just in time for Pesach. And he's leaving the port, and he sees this woman, and she's just sitting there crying. And he goes up to her and says, "Can I help you? What's wrong?" So she tells him the whole story. Not the whole thing about the Baal Shem Tov is hoping to bring Mashiach right now, but she mentions that her father is very, very holy, but no one knows him here, and they just were robbed, and they have no money, and they don't know where to be. He says, "Don't worry, you're going to come with me. You'll be at my Seder. I'll take care of you. Don't worry." And so she gets his address. She finds her father and Reb Tzvi, and they go to this rich man for Seder. The Baal Shem Tov, they've barely eaten in days. So when they get there, the host gives them food and gives them wine. In those days, people drank wine at almost every meal. The Baal Shem Tov, who really had hardly eaten or slept in days, drank quite a bit of wine, and he kind of passed out. And the Baal Bayit, the person is like, this is a holy person. And the Baal Shem Tov, this is Seder night, and the Baal Shem Tov is sleeping, and it's time to make Seder. And the man doesn't know what to do. You know, he wants to treat his guests nicely, but what's going on here? So finally, he asks Udal, "Could you please wake up your father? We need to start the Seder." She says, I'm not allowed to wake up my father. If he's sleeping, I can't wake him up. If you want to try, you try. So he goes in, and what he sees is the Baal Shem Tov is lying down, but his lips are moving. His face is like on fire, and there's like light emanating from him. And the man is, whoa, he really is a holy man. And he didn't know what to do. And he left the room. He's like, whoa. Okay, the Baal Shem Tov wakes up. He davens the evening prayer, and they start the Seder. And the Baal Shem Tov is on fire. He's just like every word of the Haggadah. And they're going through it. At a certain place in the Haggadah, we sing Hallel. We begin it at the end of what's called Magid, and we finish it towards the end of the Seder. And at the end of the Seder, we go through what's called Hallel Agadol, Hodol Hashem Ki Tov, Ki Le'olam Chazdo. But way before the time, the Baal Shem Tov starts saying, Oseh niflaot levado, ki le'olam chazdo. Oseh niflaot levado, ki le'olam chazdo. The one who makes miracles wonders, his mercies last forever. But he kept on repeating it over and over again, and with this incredible enthusiasm. And the man is like, I've never seen this before. Okay, now they finished the Seder, and the man asks him, can I ask you, why were you repeating those words like out of place? And so the Baal Shem Tov said, tomorrow you'll hear all about it, but there was a great miracle. And so the next day, sure enough, all over the Jewish quarter, word got out that in the middle of the night, in the middle of the Seder, a tremendous miracle had happened. And in short, what had happened was that there was two of the advisors to the ruler of Istanbul. One was Jewish and one was a Muslim. And the Jew is held in great esteem. And the ruler now is the son of the previous ruler, who had a very, very close relationship with the Jewish community and honored them. And the son also carried on in this tradition. The Muslim advisor was very jealous, and he wants to get rid of this guy. So again, there are different versions, but in short, he convinces the leader that the Jewish advisor is trying to overthrow him, and he has to be killed. And the leader was convinced. But what happened was his mother remembered how her husband, the previous leader, always honored the Jews and trusted them, and knew that the advisors were always giving good advice. And so she came to her son and said, she came in the middle of the night and woke him up, and she said, your father just came to me and warned me that if we harm the Jews, it's going to really be a bad scene. And it's really the Muslim advisor who is after your power. And so he listened to his mother, and he got rid of the Muslim advisor. And in the morning, word passed to the Jewish quarter of what had happened. And so later, the Baal Shem Tov explained to the man is that in his Ruach HaKodesh, he saw this happening. And that's why in the middle of the Seder, he started intoning that God is the only one who can do wonders. His mercies last forever. Ki asa nifla'ot levado, ki le'olam chazdo. And so I repeated it over and over and over again until the decree was overturned. So the man was just amazed and couldn't believe he had the honor to be in the presence of such a holy person. And so he offered them to give them the money for the passage to Israel and money to support him in Israel. And the Baal Shem agreed to take the money for himself and his daughter and Reb Tzvi to get to Israel, but he wouldn't take the money to be supported. And so they get on a ship, and it's almost like the Yonah story, that a huge storm breaks out while the ship is going from Istanbul to Akko, and they're all about to drown. And the ship is just like a toy ship in the sea, and Udal falls overboard, and she's going to drown. The sea is very rough. She's screaming for her father's help, and here different versions, but somehow at that point the Baal Shem davens, and somehow with heavenly help the storm quiets down. They're able to save Udal. But at this point, the Baal Shem Tov realizes that this sign, I almost lost my daughter. I can't push it any farther. I can't push any farther. And the boat came back to Istanbul, and he took a boat back to Europe. And that ended his attempt to meet the Ohr Hachaim. The amazing thing is, 3 months later, the Ohr Hachaim dies. He was not very old when he died. And so that, in a certain way, put an end to the Baal Shem's attempt to bring Mashiach with the Ohr Hachaim. This is a classic Chassidic story. Like I said, there's slightly different versions, but it really tells us a lot about the seriousness of the Baal Shem Tov wanting to bring Mashiach, not just wanting to bring. He felt that this could be the time. And we'll discuss more why he thought that. But here we see that the signs were given to him, and he finally understood that it's not meant to be. He returns to Europe, and here a whole new stage of his life begins, because he moves at that point to Medzibuz. And that's where he made his center until the day he died. So he is, at this point, 43, 44. He was 62 when he passed away. So for approximately the next 18 years, his headquarters is in Medzibuz, and that became the headquarters of the burgeoning Chassidic movement. So, but here also a major change occurs in the Baal Shem's not only teaching, but his whole strategy. Because as we mentioned many times, that in Europe now he's very, very famous as a Baal Shem. But there were many Baal Shems who were not the real thing. And so among the scholars, just because someone claims to be a Baal Shem Tov or miracle stories are passed around, there was a lot of pessimism about this. We know that the Baal Shem Tov, really his whole life, from the time of his father telling him on his deathbed of the importance of loving every Jew. And of course, in that time, most of the Jews were not scholars. And so the Baal Shem Tov had invested most of his life in reaching out to what we call the simple Jews in order to educate them, encourage them, inspire them. Now, the Baal Shem Tov, he doesn't abandon that whatsoever, but he now realizes that to build the kind of movement that he wants, he needs a core group of scholars who will learn his teachings and assist him to spread these teachings. In other words, he realizes he can't do this by himself. That's not his purpose. He now realizes that he has to get a group of scholars who will adopt his philosophy and then spread it. And so that began in Medzibuz. So this is a very big turning point. And it's definitely tied to the fact that he failed in his mission. So now he knows he has to redirect, reframe his whole strategy. So he comes to Medzibuz, and there he's already very famous. And the people of Medzibuz very much want someone like the Baal Shem Tov to be in their midst. And so they give him a house, and he sets up shop there. And there are many, many scholars in Medzibuz. And the first two who kind of like gravitated towards the Baal Shem Tov, one was called Rabbi Zev Kitzes and Rabbi David Forkes. And they were fairly skeptical at first, but once the Baal Shem Tov moves there and they start having interactions with him, immediately they saw what a holy, special, unique neshama he was. And so they became among the first two of the scholarly set that attached themselves to the Baal Shem Tov. And then others in Medzibuz also started to be attached to the Baal Shem Tov. And I'm putting the whole 18 years together, but little by little, a whole core group of scholars surrounded themselves, became intimately attached to the Baal Shem Tov, were learning with him and davening with him. And that became his, like the core group that gave the power to spread the teachings and the philosophy of Chassidut to the whole world. And if you remember, we learned this, that there's a tradition that before the Baal Shem Tov came into the world, he said, I don't agree to go down unless I'll have 60 like warriors, 60 scholars, 60 heroes that will be with me. And so that's what happened in Medzibuz. He got his 60, it wasn't hundreds or thousands. When the Baal Shem Tov went out, so everywhere he went, people would flock to him. But again, we have to remember, this is before mass transportation, mass communication. And so his core group was in Medzibuz. Okay, so now we're going to introduce one of the most important scholars who attached himself to the Baal Shem Tov early on. And his name was Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polonia. And it's very interesting because in his natural characteristics were very, very different than the Baal Shem Tov. First of all, he was known to be a child prodigy. He was a Talmud scholar of the highest degree, but he was very, very strict with himself and even others. There are many, many famous Rebbes or scholars that were strict with themselves, but very lenient with others. But he was strict with everyone. And he had, on occasion, fits of anger. And he seemed like the most opposite person than the Baal Shem Tov. Nonetheless, the Baal Shem Tov, he saw inside of a person. And he saw that Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, he really was a great neshama, but he needed some directing. So the story is how he became a student. Is the Baal Shem Tov went to his town, Polonia, and like he did in many, many places, he would just go to like the main market. He'd see a few people there, and he said, "Would you like to hear a story?" And the Baal Shem Tov was a master storyteller, and he would start telling these, like fantastical stories, but it would grab people's attention, grab their neshamas. And as would happen often, before you know it, crowds of people are around the Baal Shem Tov. And of course, the Baal Shem Tov uses this to give over his philosophy of life and encourage and educate and inspire. So one of the people who kind of got attracted to hear this story, he was the shamish of the shul of Rabbi Yaakov Yosef. And he was in charge of opening up the shul every day. And they davened at 8 a.m. And so he was on his way to open up the shul like he did every day. But here he got so wrapped up in this story that he lost track of time. So Rabbi Yaakov Yosef goes to shul at 8 o'clock, and it's locked. And not only that, but there's not even anyone outside waiting to get in. And he's like, what's going on here? And it's getting later and later and later. And he's getting angrier and angrier. And finally, the shamish like kind of wakes up like, oh my gosh, I'm late. And he runs to shul. And Rabbi Yaakov Yosef is very angry at him. And he says, what happened to you? So he said, well, to tell you the truth, this person came and he was telling these amazing stories, and I'm so sorry I lost track of time. And he said, go get that person. I want to talk to him. And like he's going to like really rebuke him. And so they bring the Baal Shem Tov, and he's like very angry. He says, you postponed Shachrit, and it was a terrible thing you did. And the Baal Shem Tov says, I'm so sorry. I was just telling stories to inspire people. Would you like to hear a story? So Rabbi Yaakov Yosef is like, he's kind of startled and kind of like not as usual. He said, okay, tell me a story. So the Baal Shem Tov tells him a story, and he actually likes it. He sees merit in it. And then the Baal Shem Tov says, can I tell you another story? But I want you to really listen. So he said, yes. So he said, one time I was traveling with 3 horses, a brown horse, a white horse, and a black horse. But they couldn't neigh. They couldn't neigh. And so a non-Jew came up to me and said, you have to loosen the, I'm forgetting the word, the muzzle around their mouths. They can't neigh, and if they can't neigh, they can't run properly. Let loose the muzzle. So I let loose the muzzle, and they were able to neigh, and they were able to run. So he looks at Rabbi Yaakov Yosef and he said, do you understand what I'm telling you? And Yaakov Yosef got it. In other words, the Baal Shem Tov like X-rayed his neshama, and he gave him the tikkun for his life. His whole life he had muzzled himself, and he muzzled other people as well. And the Baal Shem Tov said, you have to loosen the muzzle if you want to neigh and you want to run, meaning spiritually, you have to let loose. At that point, he became a student of the Baal Shem Tov for the rest of his life. And the reason it's so important is, I'm not sure exactly how many years later, but approximately 10 or 20 years after the Baal Shem Tov passed away, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef published the first book of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. He was the very first. And because he was the first, that became one of the major sources of the stories and the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. So that's why it took so long to tell the story. And I'm going to tell a few more because he was such an important part here. Because remember, the Baal Shem Tov didn't write anything. We only have a few letters that he wrote to his brother-in-law. There's no other evidence of his teachings. In the letters, we're going to get to one of these letters, but Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, he was instrumental in making sure that the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov were written down and could now be spread. And then other books came, but his was the first and in a certain way the most important in making sure that the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov were guarded. So a quick few stories about him and the Baal Shem Tov. So one time, the Baal Shem Tov had a custom, at that time a very unusual custom, that before he would pray Shachrit, he would smoke his pipe. But it was like a meditative exercise for him. That, well, smoking his pipe, it put him into a calm, meditative state that he could prepare himself properly. But that was unusual, that other people had different meditative ways. And at first, the Rabbi Yaakov Yosef was like, I've never seen anything like this. But the Baal Shem Tov explained to him why he did it. So one time, Yaakov Yosef started out very early in the morning. He didn't live in Medzibuz, and so he came so he could daven with the Baal Shem Tov, and he got there early. And he had thought of staying and learning and everything. So he got there just as the Baal Shem Tov was about to light his pipe. And so Rabbi Yaakov Yosef asked, can I light the pipe for you? And he did. And the Baal Shem Tov said, on the merit of your lighting my pipe, may God set your soul on fire to serve him. And Rabbi Yaakov Yosef stayed and they davened, and then he left because he got what he came for. And the Baal Shem Tov just lit up his neshama, lit up his soul. Now, we already mentioned that Rabbi Yaakov Yosef was very strict with himself. And he, like many, many, many other holy people, felt that the only way to be holy was to afflict their body, and especially with fasting. And so Rabbi Yaakov Yosef would fast every single day from dawn until night. And then he would have a meal at night. But once a month, he would fast from Shabbos to Shabbos, 7 days. And he did this for years. And many, many, many other scholars did that. And as we have learned, the Baal Shem Tov was very against this practice. He felt that maybe at a certain time in Jewish history, it made sense. But the Baal Shem Tov is coming with a message of joy. And he felt that by weakening the body in this way, because it does, constant fasting is not a healthy thing. Every once in a while, it could be very beneficial. But fasting 7 days every month is very extreme, very extreme. And this is one of the main teachings of the Baal Shem Tov to the scholarly class, that don't do this anymore. It's not good for you spiritually. And so one time, the Baal Shem Tov, in his divine inspiration, Ruach HaKodesh, he saw that Rabbi Yaakov Yosef was in the middle of one of these fasts, and he saw that there was an actual danger to his life. And he was somewhat far away. So he took his carriage with horses, and he's like going as fast as he can. And on the way, one of the horses died because he was pushing them so much. And he felt very bad about it. And he gets to Yaakov Yosef, and he says, I command you to stop this custom of yours. He had already kind of told him that he didn't want him to continue, but this time he commanded him. And he also said, I lost a horse because of this. But if you'll stop your fasting, I can understand it. And he did. Yaakov Yosef on the spot stopped, and that kind of broke his habit to do that. But this is one of the main teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. For years, he was trying to get to stop this kind of afflicting of the body. Because remember, we learned that one of the main philosophical teachings of the Baal Shem Tov comes from the verse, "B'chol derachecha de'ehu," in all of your ways, know him. And he felt that afflicting the body was not a good spiritual practice. It wasn't just that it weakens the body, and he felt it made people depressed and sad, even though they didn't understand that that's what it was coming from, because a weakened body it's not healthy physically or spiritually. But the Baal Shem Tov very much wanted to unite spiritual and physical, body and soul. He wanted to end this idea of having to afflict the body to be spiritual. That everything we do, especially eating, that eating should be a spiritual practice and a joyous thing. We shouldn't, obviously, we shouldn't be a glutton, and we shouldn't be ruled by our physical desires. But eating should be a joyous thing. God gave us food to enjoy. So that was some of the stories with Yaakov Yosef. I want to end with the minyan in Medzibuz. In Medzibuz, to this day, there is the Beit Knesset of the Baal Shem Tov. It has been refurbished, but it's in the same place and the same plan. In other words, it looks the same as the original Beit Knesset of the Baal Shem Tov. many Rebbes after the Baal Shem Tov died, Medzibuz continued to become a major center for the Chassidic movement. So many great Rebbes prayed there. The Maggid, who later kind of moved the center to his hometown of Mezrich, but he also spent time in Medzibuz the whole time the Baal Shem Tov was alive. We're only going to get to the Maggid later, because the Maggid, it comes towards the end of the Baal Shem Tov's life, even though he becomes almost the most important of all the students. It was the Maggid because he became the leader of the Chassidic movement. But he is not on the scene right now. So it's going to take us a little while to get to him. But part of the idea of having this core group was not only to learn from him, but to be the minyan with him. Because so much of Chassidic teachings have to do with the importance and the spiritual possibilities of prayer. And so we had learned already that the Baal Shem Tov, even when he was so-called hidden, when he would move to a new village, he would always try to start his own minyan, because he simply could not pray in the regular minyan, where many times it was without singing, without a lot of enthusiasm, without music, without dance, fairly short. So he would start his own minyan, and he would daven the way he davened. So that's why people started to see, like, who is this holy person? And then he'd move on. He didn't want to be known at that point, but he wasn't like totally hidden. So here, though, the Baal Shem Tov now has an opportunity with his top students to have a group of people that would pray together. And so this was a very important part of the whole birth of the Hasidic movement, was the importance of prayer. In fact, that was one of the kind of objections that those who opposed the Hasidic movement was, why are you putting so much effort, so much emphasis on prayer at the expense of learning? And the reputation was, even though it was totally false, but the reputation was, Chassidim, they don't know how to learn. Oh, yeah, they sing and dance when they pray. That was the word that got out. It was totally false. And it took actually a couple of generations to dispel that myth. But prayer and the experience of prayer and the spiritual insights that we reach and our connection with God that comes through prayer is so much part and parcel of the Chassidic movement. And so I was privileged. One time I was in Medzibuz, and I was able to go to the grave of the Baal Shem Tov. In fact, on our website, connected to this class, there's a picture of me standing by the grave of the Baal Shem Tov. But we davened Shachrit in the shul. I was only there for that Shachrit, but it was such a moving experience. It's all wood, and it's supposed to be pretty much exactly what it was like when the Baal Shem davened there. And so how could you not have that in your mind while you're davening? It was really very moving. There was really barely a minyan of us, but with the Baal Shem Tov, it was not a big Beit Knesset, but it wasn't small either. if everyone was, packed in there, you could put a good amount of people there. And so that's where the Baal Shem would be davening Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos. And so one of his students, to me, this is a very, very moving statement. He brought his son apparently he wasn't there all the time, but he brought his son to the minyan, and he said, I want you to look carefully, because we will not see such a thing until Mashiach comes. And there was a real reality to that what was born in that Beit Knesset spread to Chassidic groups around the world to this day. And I personally relate to this very, very much, because for those who know or have experienced, the Beit Knesset at our Moshav is very small. And it doesn't hold a lot of people, though you can cram, a good number in. But this is where Reb Shlomo, here in his shul in New York, this is where Carlebach davening was really, formulated, and tens of thousands of people experienced it. And now it is spread all over the world. Carlebach davening is literally all over the world. And so when this student brought his son and said, look carefully, because what you're about to experience is not going to happen until Mashiach comes. But I can relate to that, because the davening with Reb Shlomo, there are no words that can really truly express the depths, the heights, the profundity, the joy, the kavana of those prayers. So we'll stop here and, of course, continue. But I do want to say something for the people who are watching, and obviously for people who are going to be watching later. Next week, I'm not positive we'll have classes. There's a good chance I'll be gone almost the whole week. At the end of the week is Purim, but I might be gone the whole week. The following Sunday, not this coming Sunday, but the following Sunday is Shushan Purim. And there's a good chance I will be in Yerushalayim for Shushan Purim. So everyone, I always tell everyone, make sure you look at the emails that come, look at your WhatsApp, and you'll get the announcement whether there will be classes or not. I won't know for another approximately 24 to 48 hours. But we will let everyone know, but you won't know unless you check your email that comes Sunday morning and in your WhatsApp. You'll know if there will be a class or not. Thank you, everyone.